Hi, I'm Jared Petty with IGN, and today I'm joined by a special guest. Who are you, sir?
My name's Steve Golson.
And Steve, what do you have to do with what's going on the screen here?
Well, I was one of the developers at General Computer Company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who developed this game, Miss Pac-Man.
So you made Miss Pac-Man along with some others.
Yes, I did.
No kidding. And we're playing it here right now on the Steam version. And looking at it, Steve, you say this is probably an emulated version of your code?
Yes, I believe so. It looks like it. I saw a couple of little subtle things in the intro that made me think this is emulated. They've modified it though. The copyright notice is a little bit different and some things like that, but the gameplay looks to be the original code.
So, Steve, every time we play this, do you make money?
No.
No?
Unfortunately, no.
That's too bad.
No. We were paid. We earned royalties on a per cabinet basis on the arcade machines, and then subsequent to that, we earned royalties on basically dollar volume of sales for things like Xbox games and cell phone versions and things like that.
Now, Steve, you're not actually the one at the controls here, and neither am I. Who's steering for us?
This is my son, Jacob Golson, who is much better at playing these games than I am.
Now, you mentioned that sometimes developers aren't actually the best at their own games before we started this interview. Why is that?
Well, it was certainly true back then when we were playing. And it's because you have this crutch of being able to crank the game up to whatever level you want to try out. So for a player in the arcade, if they want to say, oh, I want to see Ms. Pac-Man at level 10, they'd have to play it all the way and have to get good at it to do it. But we have this crutch of having the development system emulator, and we can say, oh, well, let's just set it up to make it level 10 and give myself infinite lives, and I can just play up there without having to be terribly good at it. Maybe I'm just making excuses for myself, and I should not speak for all other developers, but that's the story I tell, and I'm sticking with it.
I don't know. I'm not any good at video games at all. So, although I do love Miss Pac-Man, and I'm almost proficient in it. Now, you mentioned emulators. So you built this game in 1981, right? Is that
that's correct. Yes.
And emulation then meant something a little different than it does now in this era of powerful computers and software emulators. What you guys used was a little different, right?
Correct. It was called a microprocessor emulation system, but essentially it's an actual Z80 microprocessor surrounded by all sorts of magic hardware, and then put on a probe on a flexible cable that you would plug into your system. It was for designing embedded systems, is what they were called back then.
And I imagine that kind of specialized hardware didn't come cheap?
No, tens of thousands of dollars easily for a system like that.
Which is amazing to think that now many people on the internet can simply on their home PC download a piece of software that accomplishes fundamentally the same task.
Essentially. It's essentially, if you're familiar with systems like MAME, it's like MAME, but it's actually built with hardware.
Really
and
cool.
We could do the same things of single stepping and examining memory but it was it was the best way to do development of microprocessor systems at the time.
Now, Miss Pac-Man is my favorite game of the Pac-Man series by a long shot.
Why, thank you.
I really love it. It's an absolute masterpiece. And this was a game that, when you began working on it, was not... the history of this is maybe a little muddy for some folks. Succinctly, what can you tell us about your relationship with Namco and how all this came together for Miss Pac-Man?
So this started life as an enhancement kit. At this point in the industry, there were, if you were an arcade owner, then your arcade game would get great revenues. You would spend $2,500 for it, and you put it in your arcade, and you'd get all the kids to drop lots of quarters in, and you'd make a lot of money. But then eventually, they would get to be really good at playing the game. But there's nothing physically wrong with the cabinet. It's just the software. The players have learned to beat the game.
Right.
So there were these what were called speed-up kits or enhancement kits that were sold in the industry, and for a few $100s, you would buy one if you're an arcade owner, and you'd plug it into your cabinet, and it would make the game run faster or be a little bit harder. And that was how General Computer started, was to have kits like that. And the first kit we did was for Atari Missile Command.
Okay.
And then our second kit was for Pac-Man, and it was called Crazy Otto. But we eventually, making the long story very short, we eventually talked to Midway, who were the people who produced Pac-Man in the United States, and we said, "Hey, we have this kit," and they said, "Oh, well, we'll buy it from you, and we'll use it to bring out an entirely new game."
Oh, it looks like Jacob, you got eaten there the first time around. We'll jump right back in if that's okay, and keep on going here.
No, it's pretty good. He got up to the
Apple
rack
well,
pretty good,
especially with keyboard controls, which is a hard way to play this game. So you got permission from Namco. Now I've heard the story
from Midway.
Or from Midway. Pardon me. I say Namco. I apologize. Yeah, I've heard the story a lot of different ways. Thank you so much for clarifying it. You guys actually did end up officially licensing this through them or working in conjunction with them? How did it work?
With Midway, yes. So
Midway.
we signed a licensing agreement with Midway
Yeah.
for this game called Crazy Otto,
Okay.
and that they would produce it either in kit form, like we initially intended,
Yeah.
and selling it to arcade owners who owned a Pac-Man cabinet.
Okay.
But also in the contract, it said, "Oh, if we bring this out as a new game, as a complete cabinet, then you'll also get paid for that." And that's
Cool.
really what turns out. That's really what Midway wanted to do, because their Pac-Man production had just ended at the end of 1981, and they were looking to keep their factory full. And they had nothing new coming from Namco that they could build.
And along came a markedly superior sequel to Pac-Man made by you guys in the form of Crazy Otto. Now, if I want to play Crazy Otto now,
Yes.
where can I go to do that, Steve?
Unfortunately, nowhere.
Okay.
So due to the variety of legal issues, who owns what intellectual property is a difficult thing to explain. But basically, the rights to this is all for Namco's benefit. And so we cannot turn around and say, "Oh, well, here's Crazy Otto, here's the ROMs, you can play it." Occasionally, we will bring one out at various game conferences for people to play, but it's sort of a one-off thing.
How many dedicated Crazy Otto machines remain functional in the world?
Just one.
Just one.
Yeah,
And,
in my basement.
In your basement, okay.
But the software is safely archived away, so please don't worry.
So it's protected. That's
Yes,
nice. That's good to
right.
know.
There have been a few people who have made their own Crazy Otto mimic games, if you will, by starting with Pac-Man and, let's just modify the character set. And so it appears to be Crazy Otto, but it's not exactly the real thing.
There are some subtle nuances that are different there?
Well, not so much, because the gameplay for Crazy Otto is essentially identical to Ms. Pac-Man.
Okay.
So it's really just cosmetic. I think there are a few gameplay differences, because when we stopped developing Crazy Otto toward November of 1981, there were certainly a few changes that were made to the code after that. And so if I go back and recover Crazy Otto code, there are a couple of changes that were made to make it Ms. Pac-Man that are not in Crazy Otto. But essentially the gameplay is the same. But so if you take Ms. Pac-Man and you hack it to change the characters, it's essentially the same play as Crazy Otto.
Now, what about, you mentioned that this started life as an enhancement board. So
Yes.
because you started that process earlier on, before you had your relationship with Midway, you didn't have access to the Pac-Man source code when you did that directly, right? You actually had to figure out a way to reverse engineer that?
Yes, exactly. So, and that's exactly the right word to use. Reverse engineer. We had the schematics. We had the code that we could dump out of the Pac-Man cabinet, and it's 16K bytes worth, and it prints out to be about 180 pages of disassembled code. But this is just raw disassembly with no comments and no nothing. You had to understand it yourself.
So first you got the code, and then you had to figure out what it did, which is absolutely
Yes.
fascinating.
Yes, correct.
And how long did that take you?
We started the Crazy Auto project in mid-June of 1981, and it was essentially complete by early October.
Now, Steve, a question I've wanted to ask and haven't yet since yesterday. So, this game itself began life as an enhancement board. And then I have played two main versions of Miss Pac-Man in my life. One is the one that we're playing right here, right now, emulated. But there's also a much faster version that's very popular in hardware. And I hear people refer to that as the speed-up chip version.
Yes.
What can you tell me about that?
There's one byte that you change.
Okay.
It takes 1 byte to change it. And that is essentially this is the speed that Ms. Pac-Man moves in the maze.
Okay.
And if you change that, well, it moves a different speed.
And that's changed through a hardware modification?
Hardware. Well, let's watch the
let's watch the
cutscene here.
Anything to tell us about what's going on?
Yes, the music was written by Chris Rode, and the animation was done by Mike Horowitz. So I had little to do with this, but I can enjoy it.
And this was originally Otto and female Otto, right?
Correct.
Going back and forth.
Correct. And the Otto was a character that, if you look at the side of a Pac-Man cabinet and look at the artwork on it, that's kind of what Otto looked like. It was, imagine a Pac-Man, but he's got legs, and he's got blue eyes, and he struts around the maze in sort of a 3D fashion of how he, though that was the collision bug that you did not collide. So.
Oh, yeah, there's a bug?
Yes, there's this, it's well known in Pac-Man. There's a certain way where the Pac-Man and a monster can pass through each other. Mm-hmm. And it has to do with the way the collision routine is written. And we left that alone in Ms. Pac-Man because it's to the benefit of the player.
Okay.
And so we did not want to take that out.
So going back to that speed-up process, what do you have to change to make? You said it's one bit.
So you change 1 byte in the code. And so if you have your own Pac-Man cabinet, if you plug in new ROMs that have that 1 byte changed, and there are I've seen multi-game versions that allow you to select whether you want to go fast or not, and all they're doing is sometimes dynamically perhaps modifying that 1 byte.
Okay. Was that an official enhancement you guys did,
no.
or did somebody? Okay, so someone did that on top of your work.
Correct.
So, interesting. Absolutely fascinating. What did you think when you first saw that out in the wild?
Well, that was interesting. You know, I'm sort of a purist. I was like, oh, you ought to play the game the way it is. But it is very compelling. It makes it, I think, less of a strategy game and more of like a Twitch game.
Yeah.
So it makes it a different game. But if you enjoy it, that's fine.
Neat.
Yeah.
So of all the Pac-Man games, which one do you enjoy playing the most?
Oh, I'd have to say Ms. Pac-Man.
Yeah.
I don't play as much as I probably should.
Oh,
but
okay.
We now have a Junior Pac-Man game in our basement. We were trying to keep track of how many games we have, dozen or so arcade games, and so I should play more Junior Pac-Man now that we have one. Mm-hmm. But Ms. Pac-Man's my favorite.
It's also my favorite, something I really enjoy, and so happy to have you in here today. We're also we're doing some written work, a more extensive interview with this gentleman to talk more about what's going on with Pac-Man, along with some photographs of some really cool historical relics that I hope you guys will check out on IGN. Thank you so much for coming, Steve.
Well, you're very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Jacob doesn't have a mic on, but thank you so much for playing, Jacob. He's nodding. And for everything, Miss Pac-Man, Pac-Man, Pac-Man Jr., Baby Pac-Man, Pac-Man Plus, at all, etc., stay with your friends here at IGN.